Let's forget about just thinking big for a minute. We're here to talk about acting big. This is a deep dive into the 10x rule, not as some fluffy motivational slogan, but as a real tactical activity-based system for making success a totally predictable outcome instead of just a hopeful wish. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the core idea, the foundation. Then we'll get into the inputs you can actually control. After that, we'll explore the mindset you need. Break down the 10x activity matrix that top performers practically live by, look at a real-world example, and then finally, we'll lay out your personal plan to put this all into action. All right, let's dive right in. Section 1 is all about the foundation. You have to get this part right because everything else we talk about is built on top of it. This is about shifting your entire approach from just hoping for success to literally manufacturing it. So what is the 10x rule really? Well, the term was made famous by Grant Cardone, but a lot of the core principles of activity-based sales were really pioneered by the legend Brian Tracy. And here's the big idea, the fundamental truth. You can't control the outcome of a single sale, but you can 100% control your sales activity. And you know what? That changes absolutely everything. And that leads us straight to the law of probabilities. See, instead of crossing your fingers for a good month or just hoping that big deal closes, the 10x rule says you use massive, overwhelming action to make success a statistical certainty. You stop being a gambler waiting for a lucky card, and you become the factory that produces results on a predictable assembly line. Okay, so if it's all about activity, then what kind of activity are we talking about? Well, in this section, we're going to look at exactly what the top 1% focus their energy on. And trust me, this is where the amateurs and the pros go their separate ways. And this right here, this shows the difference perfectly. The average person, they obsess over the things they can't control, like whether or not they're going to close this one sale. But the top 1%, they totally ignore that. They focus exclusively on the inputs they can control. The number of calls, the number of doors knocked, the number of presentations they give, that is their entire universe. So, how do they actually put this into practice? First, they live and die by a schedule of success. And this isn't some to-do list, it's a non-negotiable target. For example, making 10 prospecting calls before noon isn't a goal, it's a law. This insane consistency creates what we call a statistical flywheel. Once it gets spinning, the law of averages just kicks in, and your results go from being random to being totally predictable. Now, let's talk about the methodology and, just as important, the psychological armor you have to wear to operate at this insane level. The core method is actually kind of beautiful in its simplicity. It's called the mud against the wall theory. The idea is if you throw enough mud, and by mud I mean calls, proposals, any kind of activity, at a wall, you stop worrying about any single piece of it. Why? Because you know with absolute certainty that a predictable percentage is going to stick. It totally reframes the game. Volume becomes your ultimate weapon. And here's exactly why that volume is so critical. Get this, a staggering 80% of all sales are closed on or after the 5th attempt. Just let that sink in for a second. Most people give up after the first or second no. So massive action isn't just about getting more yeses today. It's about making sure your pipeline is so full that you're still in the game on that crucial 5th, 6th, or even 7th try. And that brings us to the unofficial motto of pretty much every top producer out there. Some will, some won't, so what? Next. A no isn't a personal attack. It's not failure. It's just a piece of data on your path to a yes. You completely disconnect your ego from the outcome and just move on to the next activity. This mindset creates this incredibly powerful self-esteem loop. It's a funny thing. The more you do, the less you fear failure. When you are constantly taking action, you're just too busy to be afraid. Your self-respect gets tied to your commitment to the activity, not to the result of any one single interaction. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty, the operating system. This matrix we're about to look at, it's not a theory. This is the literal daily playbook that separates the top 1% from literally everyone else. Let's really break this down because the differences are just wow. Let's take prospecting. The bottom 80%, they might get started around 11 a.m. The top 1%, by then, they're already hours into their day, having front-loaded their most important work at 7 a.m. Persistence? We already talked about this. One no and they're done versus pushing past 5 attempts. And look at skill work. The average person relies on their gift of gab, but the pro invests 2 hours every single day in learning and sharpening their skills. But honestly, the most mind-blowing difference is in goal setting. The average person has these vague ideas, these intentions. The top 1%? They write down at least 100 goals and they review them daily. Why on earth would they do that? Because that simple act programs your subconscious mind to hunt for opportunities and gives you this laser-like focus. The result is a jaw-dropping 1,000% increase in your probability of success, just from that one habit. But does this kind of crazy, massive action actually work in the real world? Well, let's look at a classic example, and then we're going to cover some of the common traps that can completely derail you, even if you have the best intentions. You have to hear this legendary story about the Corning glass salesman. His tool was super simple, a ball-peen hammer and a little piece of safety glass. And his activity was even simpler. He would walk into an office, put the glass on the desk, and just whack it with the hammer to prove it wouldn't shatter. The sheer volume of these demos, this one simple, repeatable action, made him the top salesman in all of North America. And the 10x upgrade? When his competitors started copying him, he started handing the hammer to the customer and letting them hit it. Brilliant. But listen, high activity has to be smart activity. You have to avoid common traps like geographic avoidance. That's when you drive all over town just to avoid making the next call. You have to stop make-work habits, like organizing your desk when you know you should be prospecting. And please, remember, high volume does not mean giving speeches. It means asking more and better questions to get to the point way faster. All right, let's bring this all home. This is your clear, actionable guide to start implementing the 10x rule, like right now. First, you need to calculate your activity gap. If you want to double your income, don't just try to work a little bit harder. No, figure out how many calls it takes to get one sale and then 10x that activity. Let the math do the heavy lifting for you. Second, turn your car into a university on wheels. Always be learning with audio programs. And third, practice mental rehearsal. Before every single important call, see it in your mind going perfectly. That's how you build psychological momentum. It's like Napoleon Hill famously wrote, "Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve." You see, the 10x rule isn't just about the physical action, it's about expanding your belief in what's actually possible through that action. And we'll end with this gem from Brian Tracy, whose principles are really the bedrock of this whole system. Success is predictable, it leaves tracks. The 10x rule is not magic. It's a proven, repeatable path, a set of tracks that you can choose to follow right now to get extraordinary results.